It's recording. We're really, really excited to share with you the life of Augusto Boal, along with the Theater of the Oppressed. My name is Christopher. That's Haley over there. Forgive me personally if I end up mispronouncing things because there's a lot of Brazilian names in here. But yeah, Shelby, if you don't mind pulling up the presentation, that'd be great. Awesome. Yeah. So we're just going to do a very quick crash course video for you guys, just to get a little bit of an idea of what we're talking about. It's only going to be 4 minutes, but I figured it'd be fun to throw in. So yeah, cool. There's a video on the next slide.
I can't hear it.
Yeah. I think you have to share computer audio. Show me.
Okay, let's try this again.
Okay.
B9. Let's turn to another B9. Let's turn to another theater maker interested in blurring boundaries between actor and audience. That would be this guy, Augusto Boal, born in Brazil in 1931. Initially, he studied chemical engineering, but while he was a student at Columbia University, he was introduced to the theories of Brecht and Stanislavski. Later on, he was profoundly influenced by the educator Paulo Freire, who pioneered the pedagogy of the oppressed, a non-hierarchical educational method. Returning to Brazil, Boal began to direct plays at the Arena Theater, first classics and then plays written by Brazilian playwrights. He toured his plays to poor neighborhoods. These plays often ended with actors asking their audience to rise above oppression. Boal began to think that instead of just talking to audiences, he should be listening to them and empowering them as well. As his practices evolved, he encouraged audiences to talk back to the action. You can see the influence of Brecht here, and to suggest new actions for the characters. Legend has it that during one performance, a female audience member couldn't make an actor understand her suggestion, so she stepped on stage and performed the action herself. This birthed the idea of the spect actor. No. The spect actor is part spectator, part actor, and all awesome. Unlike those glasses. Get out of here. This method eventually became known as forum theater. A forum theater exercise begins with a short scene centered on a social problem, sexism, say, or racial discrimination. And after the scene concludes, it starts again. This time, spect actors are invited to interrupt the proceeding with their own actions. A facilitator, usually called a joker, monitors the performance. The joker doesn't actually joke. They make sure that each spect actor is able to complete their action and then asks the audience to evaluate the usefulness of each proposed solution to the social problem. If your idea of theater is hiding in the dark and ruffling your playbill, perhaps at most glaring carefully at someone unwrapping a bit of candy in the dark, Theater of the Oppressed is not for you. Boal believed that encouraging audience members to step on stage was a way of empowering them. This meant showing them that they could take action in their own lives if they felt that they were experiencing injustice. This didn't sit too well with Brazil's military regime. And in 1971, after a performance of Brecht's Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, Boal was kidnapped, tortured, eventually exiled. Boal took his participatory show on the road, eventually settling in Paris and continuing to teach. In 1979, he published his first book, Theater of the Oppressed. He also pioneered another form of political theater, invisible theater, which is a kind of theater that the audience doesn't even know is theater. It could be happening anywhere, anytime. It could be right behind you right now, but probably not. He relocated to Brazil in 1986, became a city councilman, and pioneered a form known as legislative theater. In this form, citizens were encouraged to participate in scenes that helped to identify the social problems that they were facing and to brainstorm possible solutions. Augusto Boal died in 2000.
Alrighty, cool. So that was just like a little bit of like a snippet of Augusto Boal. So basically, if you don't mind going to the next slide, Shelby, that'd be great. Basically, to understand what theater of the oppressed is, you have to be able to look at the context of the life of Augusto Boal. So obviously, you're going to hear a little bit of repetition with me talking for the next few minutes, and then also what the video was saying. But I'm also here to fill in gaps along the way. So like the video said, Augusto Boal was born and raised in Rio de Janeiro from 1931, but he moved to the United States to study chemical engineering at Columbia University, where he encountered, he developed a really close relationship with one of his professors, who's named John Gassner. And John Gassner encouraged Boal to connect with groups such as like the Black Experimental Theater on campus, which later exposed him to Bertolt Brecht, Konstantin Stanislavski, as previously said, and a lot of Marxist ideology at the same time. Gassner was also well connected throughout the American theater realm. He knew people from the likes of Tennessee Williams and Arthur Miller, who are two of the biggest American playwrights of the 20th century. If you don't know them, go ahead and look them up. Arthur Miller, writer of Death of a Salesman and a plethora of different other works, Tennessee Williams, Glass Menagerie, et cetera, et cetera. But basically, Augusto Boal wasn't really intrigued at first with theater, but John Gassner was a guy who opened him up to this new world. So basically, following these this breakthrough into theater, Augusto Boal got involved in the Actors Studio in New York. If you don't know what the Actors Studio is it was a studio developed by Lee Strasberg. I don't remember when particularly. I think it was in the 30s or 40s. But Lee Strasberg is also a huge name in American theater, who is basically seen as the equivalent of Konstantin Stanislavski in the United States. And Stanislavski, if you may not know, is responsible for developing the method system of acting, where a actor is basing their character not off of tropes, as was done in the centuries prior to the 20th century, but there was more of like a psychological approach to acting. So, instead of, saying like, oh, this action means this particular thing, it means I'm angry, or it's describing this emotion. An actor was more bent on learning about his character and developing a biography of the character to portray some sort of a person that resembled reality on stage and that the audience could connect with. So moving on to the next slide. So basically, after his work, after graduating, he shortly returned to Rio de Janeiro, where he worked at the Arena Theater. And at the Arena Theater, he produced and directed a plethora of classical pieces. One of the most notable was a production of Mice and Men by John Steisbrecht. I don't remember his last name. Anyways. Basically, what he would do with these classical pieces is he would take it with a leftist approach by forming the themes of each of the productions to fit some of the struggles that Brazilian people were facing at that time. And a lot of, he did a number of these sorts of productions, which eventually led him to earn the Direction Revelation Award from the Association of Arts Critics of Sao Paulo in 1956. Now, towards the end of the decade, the Arena Theater was on the edge of bankruptcy. So they began to invest in national theater, which was basically pieces created by Brazilian dramaturgs, basically homegrown Brazilian theater, not relying on other works that came from outside of the country, right? So it proved successful, and Boal was responsible for establishing a seminar for dramaturgy in response to their national theater investment, which basically helped to pull a lot of young Brazilian playwrights and dramaturgs into their fold and start writing for them. So like the video mentioned, what what Boll was also very big on is he brought the ideas of Stanislavski and Bertolt Brecht, along with Marxist ideology, into the arena theater at Brazil. And what he did basically is he created an atmosphere where after a production, the audience was encouraged to stay for a period of time, and they were allowed to basically ask questions about the production, and talk about, oh, what would you do differently during this production, right? Are like the characters, the situations, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, like, the new process allowed audience members to, what he also did after that, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. What he did is he took this process and shaped it in a way where an audience member, like the video was saying, could interrupt a scene in which, like, someone was facing particular form of oppression, whether that be in the form of sexism, racism, classism, et cetera, et cetera. And they could interrupt the process and say, well, what could the victim of oppression do in this scenario to change the situation? And one of the biggest, one of the most, basically, like, this led it to, stumbling over my words. On one occasion, a woman became so frustrated in explaining to the actor what to do, so she ended up going on stage and just doing it for them. And Augusto Boll essentially called this the inception of the spect actor, which is a combination of a spectator and the word actor. So the audience was basically not just relegated to staying in their seats for the entire production, but was also responsible for influencing what happened on stage. If you could go to the next slide, Shelby, please. Okay, so little context. In 1964, there was a coup d'etat against the democratically elected administration in Brazil, which was led by the military, supported by the Catholic Church, along with the US State Department through their embassy at Brasilia, which is yikes. If you haven't studied enough of Latin American history, especially in the past century, the US has sticky fingers in essentially every single country that is south of the border. But anyways, they were also responsible for usurping the democratic process in Brazil. And basically, like, a lot of this has to do with the Red Scare and the Cold War, and how a lot of countries were trending towards socialist ideology. And obviously the United States was, like, super against that, and sacrificed socialist democratically elected socialists for fascist dictatorships. This is seen in several Latin American countries, Cuba, Chile, and in this case, Brazil, right? So for 21 years, this government was basically hell-bent on the eradication of political dissidents, and they thrived on media censorship and anti-communist propaganda. Now, given the fact that Augusto Boll was a self-proclaimed leftist, he gained traction for his cultural activism against systems of oppression, particularly classism. And this government was put up by the elites, right? So the two essentially, like, were born to be in conflict with each other, right? Anyways, the Brazilian government began to take notice, and under the Medici administration, who followed two other presidents prior to, I don't remember their names, dissent was widely and systematically disparaged. So in 1971, after returning home from a show of the Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, which is, interestingly enough, written by Bertolt Brecht and is about the toppling of a fascist dictatorship, but was kidnapped, tortured, and exiled to Argentina. He then moved to Europe, specifically Paris, to continue moving forward with his work. And in his time abroad, he published his first book called The Theater of the Oppressed, where he basically divulged an amalgamation of revolutionary practices he had developed at the Arena Theater, but obviously wasn't allowed to be there in Brazil to continue working there. And following the book's subsequent success, he traveled around the globe, And for the next dozen years, he went on to teach his revolutionary approach to theater by establishing several centers for the theater of the oppressed. Eventually, he organized the first international festival in Paris in 1981, and this is a festival that continues to this very day. I'm not sure what their plans were for this year. Probably a good thing to look up later if you're interested. In 1985, the military junta was finally removed, and Boll was asked to return to the Arena Theater in Rio. Next slide. Right, cool. So as I said, 1985, the regime was finally removed. When an election finally overturned the dictatorship, there was finally a democratically elected president in the seat of power. And in 1988, a new constitution was drafted and adopted, which basically overturned the entire military regime and put it to rest. So in 1992, oh, sorry, my bad, getting ahead of myself once again. So Boll, upon returning to Rio de Janeiro, he established a major center for the theater of the oppressed there in Rio, and had formed over a dozen companies which developed community-based performances. In 1992, he ran. This is kind of an interesting scenario. So he ran for the city council in Rio de Janeiro, which is basically like the title of that is the vereador. And it was at first more of a theatrical stunt because he was very much involved in social justice and the progression of society in general. But he received a lot of support, and out of a pool of 1,000 different people who ran with 45 seats up for election, he was actually elected. And so what he did, bouncing off of that, is he created a new type of form theater that was born out of the theater press in order to properly legislate as a representative of the people. So basically what he did is, this goes on to be called the legislative theater. And what he did is brought people together of the communities that he represented, and did the same things that he did earlier with Theater of the Oppressed, but with the goal being creating actual policies that would alleviate oppressions established by the government, right? So this basically led him to proposing 40 different laws on the council floor. Only 13 of them were passed, and he eventually lost his seat, unfortunately, in 1996. But some of the other things that he did during his time on the city council and his continued propagation of the Theater of the Oppressed. In 1992, he was invited to be the keynote speaker for the National Conference of the Association for Theater and Higher Education in Atlanta, Georgia, which is an international conference of higher educators obviously around the world, and in university spaces. He also did several conferences and seminars throughout the United States in this period of time. And in 1992, he finally published his second major work, which is Games for Actors and Non-Actors, which we have linked in our resources that you can find later on. Really, really dense piece of work, but a lot of fun activities that we're hopefully planning to do in a future workshop that is in person, hopefully. But yes, in July 1993, the 7th International Festival of the Theater of the Oppressed attracted 150 practitioners from around the world, which, yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, yeah. Anyways, Augusto Boll continued to propagate the Theater of the Press and legislative theater by bringing it on international tours in the United States, like I said. In March of 2009, he earned the title of the World Theater Ambassador, which was given to him by UNESCO. And it was a few short months later that he passed away at the age of 78 in Rio. But following his death, his work continues to influence the theater world abroad, and puts forth more progressive ideas and brings a more practical approach to theater in regards to policy making. And yeah, I can go ahead and hand it off to you then, Haley.
Okay, hello. So now we're going to go into a little bit of a deeper dive of what forum theater and theater of the oppressed actually is, because I know when we decided we were doing this workshop, I didn't really know. So we're going to tell you now. So as you can see, it's basically a form of community-based education that uses theater as a tool for social change. So its main goal is to fight oppression and acknowledge it and find different ways to present that. The next slide, please, Shelby. Okay, so our main 6 techniques are image theater, forum theater, cop in the head, rainbow of desire, invisible theater, and legislative theater. Next slide. Awesome. So image theater is our first technique. It's kind of like, in some ways it's almost like charades, but a little bit of, it has more depth than that. So in most cases, whoever is leading the activity would describe a word, and the participants would use their bodies as clay to act out the word. So if you were given the word poverty, people might like crawl up in a ball on the floor, for example, or say, just express themselves that way to show oppression, but through their own bodies. Again, these are one of those, a lot of this stuff is hard to explain rather than just show and do. So I apologize in advance for that. But yes, image theater is like that. Another example is if you've ever played like The Invisible Machine, that very common theater game where you all create one image with your body, it's very similar to that. Next slide, please. So next is forum theater, which is definitely the most common. They went into, they explained it a little bit in the crash course video. So like I said, it's very common. Basically, a scene is presented that shows some form of oppression, and then the scene is stopped and the spect actors are invited to fix whatever the form of oppression is in whatever way they see fit. So if we go to the next slide, we're actually going to have an example. We would have loved to actually do forum theater with you guys, but unfortunately it doesn't really translate over Zoom. So we're just going to watch this instead. Some things to note is that this was one of Theater of the Oppressed New York City's productions in 2011 that speaks about the struggles of homelessness in New York. And the audience members are made up with people who have either experienced homelessness or were currently experiencing homelessness. And note how the Joker, who kind of runs the whole spiel, opens up with a few warm-up activities to get the audience and the spectators ready, and kind of flips their brain around, is what I believe she says. And then she continues on to lead the discussion and choose the spectators in their suggestions. So let's watch the video.
So you may not have known that you didn't just come to sit in the audience. You didn't just come to watch a play. You came to participate in a brainstorming experience. You just shake somebody's hand next to you. But the rule is, you can't let go of their hand until you shake somebody else's hand. When I say red, you say blue. Red. Blue. Blue. Red. Red, red, red. Blue, blue, blue. Blue, blue, blue. Red, red, red. Yes, yes, red. No, no, blue. Beautiful.
times here, and I'm going to give you 30 days. 30 days. But at that time, I want to see urines. I want to see documentation that you completed your program. I want to see pay stubs. I want to see a lease. I want to see your kindergarten report card.
I got my place!
All right, Mr. Monk. I don't know, surprise me. What do you have?
Well, Your Honor, I have the papers, the documents that you asked for.
No, Mr. Monk, I'm not interested in your papers. You know what? This is ridiculous. I've gone through this 10 times this week. I'm not interested. Mr. Monk, your best is not good enough, and you've demonstrated that time and time again. I'm sick of it. I can't abide by it any longer. I grant custody, full custody, to Miss Bertha, court adjourned.
I do everything I'm supposed to do. I make my meetings, and this is the way the court treats me. This is my daughter. She's 4 years old. You know what? Forget it. I'm not gonna do anything. I'm gonna start with walk, get high, doing drugs.
So, who here has an idea for a specific moment in the play? I want you to come here and tell me, I want to try that courtroom scene, or I want to try that scene with the cop where he gets a fine for littering.
I don't know what to say, Mr. Monk. This is just going to be more of the same, right? I mean, you're just like every other person who comes through here and gives me a nice sob story and tells me that everything's going to turn around. And
But actually, Your Honor, I'm not. I'm a human being that has my past. I hope that you can see each person as an individual with their own pain and their own mistake.
Mr. Monk, are you Abraham Lincoln? Mr. Monk, I think we've heard about enough today.
I didn't think you were going to hear this from me. That's why I asked my friends for help. And I had Ray, the preacher at the church that I go to, write up this letter on my behalf. And I also had this letter written by Miss Connolly, social worker.
So what did Jared try? Very new. Help.
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 Yes, Lord.
Support. So there's many more ideas that we could come up with for all of those different moments. And none of them are the solution. But they might work better or worse in one situation or another. It might work for me and not for you. But now we've just brainstormed a whole bunch of possibilities.
In August 2010, there were nearly 37,000 homeless people, including 9,500 homeless families, 14,500 homeless children, sleeping each night in New York City.
So as you can see, it's a really cool experience, and I really wish we could have done it in person. But yeah, as you've seen, the spec doctors got the ability to engage with their own community of people who've shared similar experiences. And in some ways, it's almost like group therapy in some ways, because you all get to hash out that feeling of oppression together and work together to face it and beat it. So yes, I think it's amazing. Next slide. So now we have Cop in the Head. This is another one that's a little bit more conceptual and difficult to explain. So basically it's exploring internalized oppressions. So whether it's like the internal voices that tell you you're bad, like you're not, it's what society tells you. So you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough. These things that aren't actually existent, but in your head are telling you that you're not good enough, you're oppressing yourself in some ways. So usually when discussing Cop in the Head, it's a way of coming up with topics for theater of the oppression is the way that I've come to understand it, in that it's usually just a group discussion about exploring what the oppression you believe you're facing is and exploring why we think that way. And the fact that a lot of these people share it, which kind of takes away the power behind the oppression that we're feeling because it's a shared thing. So next, please. Now we have Rainbow of Desire, another one that's a little strange to explain. So it's very similar to forum theater in some ways, in that a scene is presented in which oppression occurs between two or more characters. And then as a group, they deconstruct the person or the situation of oppression. So the group or spectators, usually it's just like a group and not in a forum theater setting. So usually the group then begins to identify the motives behind the oppression of both the oppressor and the person being oppressed. So the goal is to explore the different colors, which is where the rainbow of desire comes in, the different colors behind our emotions. So usually, like, say, for example, the oppressor doesn't just do the oppression because he's mad. He's usually, or he's mad, but he's also frustrated with his own situation, or he's also jealous. Like, he's not just mad. So it's a really interesting way to see all of the different colors and shades behind everyone's emotions, and how everyone is made up with a different rainbow of these shades of emotion. So that's another one that, like, not only does it help everyone build community and realize the motives behind other things and help us come up with a deeper understanding of what the issue is and where it's coming from, but it also, in terms of acting, I think it's a great way to, like, explore the different emotions and where they should be coming from, and how to like I think it's just a great acting technique in general to explore those different shades. Next, please. So now we have invisible theater, which is what I like to think of a flash mob meets the, like, What Would You Do TV show, where basically they're issue-oriented scenes performed in public settings. So maybe they're trying to explore or raise the question about domestic abuse. So you would go to actors, or as many actors would just be out in public, and one actor would domestically abuse or verbally abuse their partner, and we would see what the public would do in response to that, because they would have no idea that this is just an act. Like, there's no way of knowing that. And the goal is to just raise concern about these issues that exist, especially in these places where the political climate doesn't let those conversations usually happen. So I think that's another really powerful form of theater of the oppressed, because it raises these questions without people even realizing that it is a theatrical movement. Now we have legislative theater, which is another one that we've kind of discussed earlier. It's kind of an extension of forum theater. You can see in the background picture, people are raising different colored tags or cards. Usually it's very similar in the sense of forum theater, where there's a scene on stage and the spectators get to react to what's going on and share their opinions. So as Chris mentioned before, it usually results in, like, direct changes in legislation, and usually there's legislators in the audience that are able to make that happen. So in the sense that the spectators get to make suggestions to change whatever the form of oppression is still there, but it's just taken one step further, because it usually results in, like, actual legislative change. So now we get to go into the really cool part, the impacts of theater of the oppressed and the actual changes that have happened. So most of these examples are going to come from Theater of the Oppressed New York City, because they're one of the most prominent groups that are in America right now, focusing on theater of the oppressed. So in 2013, they began their annual festival that they've been running since. So in 2013, Save the Drama, they told the stories of homeless LGBTQ youth of color and their struggles. And there was legislators in the audience, and they were so moved by what they saw that Sam Miller, who was from the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, that he helped create the new federal interagency to help these people who were struggling from homelessness. City Council member Jimmy Von Bramer was also swayed to support the Community Safety Act, thus implementing police reform in New York City. So before this, there was the stop and frisk policy, which basically targeted homeless youth of different ethnicities and pretty much discriminated against them because they weren't committing any crimes per se, but if they just look suspicious, cops could stop them and run them down and like find things, and then they would be incriminated. So this stopped that policy from existing. So that was like a direct shift in policy. Next slide, please. In 2015, in the Inside Outside, the forum play featured the stories of those struggling to find economic stability after convictions and the zero tolerance protocols in New York City schools. So the policy change, as you can see, it passed the Fair Chance Act, which banned employment applications from asking about conviction history. And it also spurred the movement to create CUNY free for students, and that was actually established in 2017 when Governor Cuomo made it free for all New Yorkers with family incomes under $100,000. And then in 2017, in the university settlement, they highlighted the issues of criminalization of unlicensed street vendors, and that resulted in City Council member Stephen Levin began to work towards eliminating the cap on merchandise vending permits. So as you can see, a lot of these forum theaters and legislative theater events have spurred like direct changes from their events.
Right. So in addition to all of these impacts that we see, in New York City particularly, and around the globe, interestingly enough, UCLA has also implemented versions of the forum theater or legislative theater here on our very campus. So in the past, the UCLA Art and Global Health Center, in conjunction with the UCLA Prison Education Program, have worked to create forum pieces that has allowed for students to put input on the subject of racism and the subject of gender, sexism, classism, violence, especially when it is concerning the school to prison pipeline and just the overall health of the student body here at UCLA. Unfortunately, though, due to coronavirus, they haven't had any. I skimmed through everything, like going to the end of the quarter and then even trying to look into their calendar for next quarter. They don't have any forum theater, legislative theater, or theater of the oppressed seminars going on in the near future. However, they do have an online event series called 10 Questions, The Reckoning, every Monday night, where students are invited to engage in conversation with an amalgamation of faculty and other academics on topics relative to our world today. Some of the things that I've seen on there is obviously the What is Justice one, so particularly in talks about the oppression of African Americans and police brutality. There was also a talk on climate change, and there's, again, a whole archive of these as well. So if you miss out on them, if you go to the link that's listed in this slide, you can also watch the previous videos, because they do indeed record their seminars. With that being said, that concludes our workshop on Bull and the Forum Theater. If you would like to look at any of our resources, learn more about Bull, Obviously, they're right in front of your very eyes. For additional info, these are just like sorry, just lost my page there for a second. For additional info, these are the two books by, the second one is by Augusto Boal, Games for Actors and Non-Actors, as you heard me mention earlier on. So again, might come into play in the future with an in-person workshop, hopefully. There's also this one you pulled up, Haley, the one on top. I don't.
Yes. So right here, run your own Theater of the Oppressed workshop. If you follow that link, it's actually a list, like a full lesson plan for a week's worth of activities Theater of the Oppressed based. And hopefully in the future, we can do an in-person workshop and actually do some of those activities. Unfortunately, most of them were touch-based or image theater relevant. So we couldn't do them over Zoom, but we'd love to do it in the future. But if you guys are really interested, there's some really great activities in there. I definitely recommend that you guys check it out.
Yeah, and that would be it. If anyone has questions, you're welcome to go ahead and ask away. Yeah. Or not. You can have a wonderful evening and enjoy a cup of hot chocolate because it's Christmas time.
Oh, great job, y'all.
I'm going to stop the recording.